I'm going to go out on a limb and say that clipless shoes and pedals are my favourite all-time bit of mountain bike tech. Let me explain why. When I first started riding mountain bikes, it wasn't a case of clips or flats, sticky rubber or cleats, or even brands like Shimano or Crank Brothers. But there was a choice you could make. And that was to either stick with the pedals that came on your bike, usually some sort of bear trap pedal, probably plastic, or do what the roadists would do. Yeah, I'd use toe clips and straps, which meant strapping your feet to the pedals. Yeah. Now I could just remind you that in the early days, mountain bikes didn't have any suspension, they had terrible brakes. The handlebar position wasn't really designed for riding complicated or technical or even rough terrain, and you had a seat post up high. So at the absolute best of times, it was crisis management trying to get through stuff. And by literally strapping your feet to the pedals, you had a much more predictable ride and you stopped your feet flying off the pedals. It was great, but also completely terrifying because you had to preempt the entire time when you're riding any sections you thought you might be able to crash on, or you needed to dab a foot in a corner, for example, and in which case you'd have to remove your feet from the toe clips, which was backwards, a completely unnatural way of doing it, and well, do your best not to crash. But thankfully, in 1990, Shimano released their SPD system. Now, this was essentially a remodeled version of what we used to see in the road world, where they had these big plastic cleats on the bottom of their shoes and they'd clip onto, basically the pedal was a giant retention system, a little bit like ski boots and ski bindings. Shimano reworked this concept into something more suitable for mountain bikes, and since then there are loads of different models and styles available today, and they've completely revolutionised the way that we can ride modern mountain bikes. Now, Shimano pedals have obviously evolved over the years, but the actual mechanism still remains the same. It's got a sprung jaw that locates over the back of the cleat, and basically as you clip in, it snaps over the back of the cleat and holds it in place. You can adjust the tension on that, and they're brilliant. Now, I've used Shimano pedals most of my sort of riding years, but in more recent years, I've been using the Crank Brothers pedal. Now, the reason for this, especially, I mean, we run Crank Brothers pedals on GMBN, but actually I was using them before this, because my local mud where I ride around Bath is pretty bad at the best of times. And the thing that these really have going for them is the jaw on the middle, you don't adjust the tension on it. So it's a very different system, but the jaw itself actually has 4 sides and it rotates, which means if it, like, however amount of mud you have on the bottom of your shoe or on the pedal, you can purge it straight through the whole system and you can always get in. Now that alone, for Northern Hemisphere and UK riding, that's a winner as far as I'm concerned. Now with clipless shoes, there's 3 major styles you can get. Cross-country shoes, trail shoes, and more gravity or downhill focused shoes. Now the gravity focused ones tend to have a sole on that looks a little bit more like something you might see on a pair of 510 flat pedal shoes. It's very flat, and the reason for that is to get contact on the bigger style pedals. Now the downside of these style shoes is the fact that the sole will flex more because they're not designed for outright pedaling efficiency. And also when you're off the bike, they're terrible for hiker bike stuff unless it's particularly dry, because you don't have a heavily lugged outer sole on them. Now the opposite can be said of the cross-country shoes. They're incredibly stiff and incredibly lightweight, and the whole point of them is to transfer all the power straight into that pedal stroke so you're not losing anything. The downside is you lose a bit of feel on there, they lack in protection, and they can be a bit uncomfortable for extended time in the saddle, really. The trail style shoe offers the best compromise, and this really is what I absolutely love. And I'll always use, despite how a shoe like this can look, they look quite serious. I promise you, a decent trail shoe can really change the way that you ride. So the uppers on them will have some kind of support. They'll have some sort of ratchet style mechanism to really clamp your foot in there. Look for a good toe box, a heel box on there, something perhaps to protect your inside ankle. And then most importantly is the sole. So you have the element of the stiffness under power transfer to get that power down to the pedal, but you have toe flex on there in an upward motion, which means they're much better off the bike for hiking stuff. And of course, then there'll be a heavily lugged sole, which shares, I'd say, more in common with a trail running or a fell running style shoe than it does with a cycling shoe, because of the fact you need to be able to hike up some pretty radical terrain on modern day mountain bikes in order to get to some of the best stuff. Mountain biking for me is all about the flow. Now, I don't mean flow trails, I don't mean trails with loads of berms and stuff on. I mean trying to make stuff that doesn't flow. Like, that really is the appeal to me of riding a section of trail or wherever, it could be a blind section of trail, and finding your flow. Now, being attached to the bike, 100% it helps. The bike becomes an extension of you. Everything that you do, you can naturally move around, you're unhindered. You know, it literally is another part of your body. And as a result, even when you're pedaling, you can still maneuver the bike around. And it's just a really efficient way to cover ground on a bike. Love it. Check it out. Climbing up real steep terrain though, especially when you've got obstacles to negotiate, this is really where clipless pedals come in. I mean, there's a little section here. I'm gonna have to unweight, pedal and kind of pull the bike up at the same time. And that's one of the benefits, really is. Like, I'm just positive I couldn't get up things like this on flat pedals. It's kind of amazing what you can get up with these. When you're clipped in as part of the bike, you can move that bike around much easier. Now, some flat pedal riders might disagree with me here and even say that you're not riding correctly when you ride on clips because you have to on flats, but hear me out. When you ride on flat pedals, you basically have to weight the pedals really heavily, dip those heels down to keep your feet planted. As a result, front end is unweighted, there's a lot of weight on the back end, you can smash the bike through stuff a bit too heavy, a bit damaging on the rear end. When you're on clips, you're in a more neutral position on the bike, so arguably it's much more reactive. Now combine that with modern geometry bikes and it's further accentuated. It's just a more efficient position to really dance and move the bike around on terrain. Here and there you're going to have to do the old hiker bike to get up stuff. And let's face it, flat pedal shoes, kind of unfairly, just haven't had the same amount of development as proper tech trail shoes. These have been designed to help me get up things like this. They've got toe flex on them, they've got a dual rubber compound sole. Everything about them is purpose made. Commitment. Yeah, clipping in requires loads of commitment, which a lot of people will probably hate. But I absolutely love that because it makes a decision for me half the time. Whether I'm climbing something like this or I'm descending something that's steep, you're in. You've got to get it done. If you're climbing something like this, you're going to topple over if you don't commit. But also, an added upside of committing and stuff like this is when you're clipping in, you can really use the pedals to advantage. Not only have I already told you about this from climbing stuff and lifting the wheel around, but low speed skills, trials-based skills, they're absolutely brilliant for it. And any rider using clips can really use these to their advantage. As you probably gathered by now, I like clipping in. And by far, my favourite thing about clipping in is the changing of direction that you can do by using the pedals to help move that bike around. Now, think about it like skiing. So although on your bike, you're going to have a favourite foot forwards, your feet are kind of still together. And if you remain in that position on the bike, it puts you in a really good defensive position for just changing direction, whatever's going on. If you come across something real rough and rowdy on the trail, you can dance that bike around stuff, whereas if you're on flat pedals, arguably, sometimes you have to just muscle up and just hit the stuff. I think you can be much lighter on the bike. It works so much better for the way I ride, and really, it helps me float on the bike, which is the most important thing. Now, over all the years of all the technical innovations that have come out, I mean, look, carbon fibre bike, front and rear suspension, tubeless tyres, electronic gears, the list goes on. But still, by far, the most favourite thing for me, the way I ride and what I can do on a bike, is clipless pedals. Absolutely love them, what they can do. What do you ride? Do you ride flats or clips? I'd love to know what you ride. Let us know in those comments. I'm off for another run. See you later.